Okay, dear friends, nice to be back with you here. And today we are going to talk on bronchial asthma, a very, very common and clinically important condition too. And I'm going to go through the GINA guidelines. What is GINA? GINA is Global Initiative for Asthma. It's a global organization, Global Initiative for Asthma, and we are going to use those guidelines to look at it. And this is available on my website, www.drserma.in. All of you make note of that. Now, the American Lung Association puts the slogan like this: when you can't breathe, nothing else matters. Isn't it? When you can't breathe, nothing else matters. Whatever you have studied, wherever you are living, whatever is your riches, nothing else matters if we cannot breathe. So the aim is to keep the breathing to the best of the ability and prevent asthma getting worsened, right? Bronchial asthma, there are two things, GINA and GOLD. What is GOLD? Global Initiative for Chronic Obstructive Lung Disease. Okay, GOLD we are not going to see today. When we see chronic obstructive lung disease, COPD, we will be looking at the GOLD guidelines. Today, what are we looking at? We are looking at ROAD. What is ROAD? Reversible obstructive airway disease. And that ROAD, time now to unclear our age-old, outdated practices and embark on modern management of bronchial asthma, right? So needless to say that this presentation has got a host of references: GINA, GOLD, COPD Professional, and then Chest Society Guidelines, Canada, and ACCP, American Thoracic Society, British Thoracic Society, National Institute of Clinical Excellence, UK, ChestNet, CDC, Atlanta, and NAEPP, that is the NIH Libraries website. So many references are taken here. I humbly acknowledge all those people who have contributed to the wealth of this presentation. Okay. So now, what is asthma? Basically, there are two problems here. What are they? Number one, primarily allergic inflammation of the airways. AW stands for airways. Allergic inflammation of the airways is the first abnormality. Don't say bronchoconstriction. Bronchoconstriction is secondary. Most of you might be thinking asthma means bronchoconstriction. That is secondary. The primary defect is allergic inflammation of the small airways particularly. Okay, and then secondarily that leads to bronchoconstriction. That is why it is an obstructive airway disease. So what is the first thing? Airway hyperreactivity. That is because of allergic inflammation. There is airway hyperreactivity, AWHR, that results in recurrent wheezing, cough, and shortness of breath. Okay, airway hyperreactivity, this is because of the allergic inflammation. The allergen may be within the body, maybe in the external environment. Airflow limitation is variable, and the most important part of asthma is often reversible. This is the distinction between ROAD, that is reversible obstruction of the airways, and COPD, that is chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or also called sometimes COAD, chronic obstructive airway disease. So these two are same entity. That we are not going to discuss. We are going to discuss reversible obstruction. What did we learn? We learned it has got twofold pathology. One is the allergic inflammation. The second thing is consequent bronchoconstriction. And of course, inflammatory cells like dendritic cells, mast cells, eosinophils, and lymphocytes are brought into picture. These are important for us to know because we use mast cell inhibitors. That is the reason mast cells are brought in for your information. Okay. Now, look at this diagram. There is an inflammation. That is the first and foremost thing. Why there is inflammation? It is not infection. It is inflammation. Inflammation because of innate atopy. Innate means which is there in the body, not from outside. It's also called the endogenous atopy or innate atopy, and then there are outside risk factors are there which will trigger the atopy to form acute inflammation of the bronchi, which will be slowly continuing as chronic inflammatory disease. Okay, what does this result? This results in obstructive airways, airway hyperreactivity, and airway hyperreactivity leads to airflow limitation both by inflammation and by bronchoconstriction. Inflammation limits the airflow, and bronchoconstriction also leads to airflow obstruction. And the exacerbations are caused due to various extraneous and ingenious risk factors. Ultimately, this inflammation, airway hyperreactivity, and airflow limitation together will cause the symptoms. What are they? Shortness of breath, cough, and wheeze. These are the symptoms of asthma. So now what did we learn? We have learned that asthma is not one particular problem. It's not bronchoconstriction mainly. It is airway inflammation. Airway inflammation leads to airway hyperreactivity. That produces secondary bronchoconstriction. Inflammation also limits the airflow. There could be innate atopy or endogenous allergy, and there will be extraneous risk factors, and there will be perpetuating and exacerbating factors. Ultimately, they lead to three important symptoms. One, shortness of breath. Two, cough. And three, wheeze. Okay, there are two types of asthma described classically in your textbooks. One is called the intrinsic asthma, also called the atopic type of asthma. How do I identify? The immunoglobulin GE levels will be very high in that, and it is genetic usually. Okay, there is increased nasal secretion, there will be nasal polyps, there will be other atopic disorders like atopic dermatitis, eczema, and other allergies. So how do I identify intrinsic asthma? It is called atopic asthma or intrinsic asthma. And this produces increased nasal secretions, nasal polyps, dermatitis, eczema, other allergic disorders coupled with increase in the immunoglobulin E levels. What is the other one? Non-atopic type called the extrinsic asthma, where there are allergens outside which trigger the hyperreactivity. Allergy to sensitizing agents, the commonest being, when I ask you what is the allergen, you say pollen, pollen, pollen. That's not in our countries. Pollen is in countries where there is no dust. In countries like India, Southeast Asia, Bangladesh, house dust is the commonest allergen which sensitizes the airways. Okay, of course, pollen, pets, cockroach is a big problem in our country. This cockroach feces is highly allergic, and house dust and cockroach feces are very important for us to control extrinsic allergic asthma. What did we learn? Atopic allergy, atopic innate type, intrinsic asthma, IgE, other allergic manifestations. Non-atopic, extrinsic, outside allergens, sensitization to them, commonest being house dust, cockroaches. And of course, some pets, pollen in areas where a lot of pollinating flowers and then plants are there, particularly in the West, pollen becomes a very important source of extraneous allergy. Okay, what are the causal factors? The causal factors are indole allergens, domestic mites, Dermocentor andersoni, its name. Forget about a big name. There is a mite called, I'll show you the picture of that. Domestic mite, it is there on your pillow covers, on your bed linen, on your sofas, on your chairs, everywhere. And then animal allergens, cockroach allergens, fungal molds are very common in our country because of the warmer nature where fungi usually multiply much faster in a warmer environment. Outdoor allergens, pollens, respiratory syncytial virus, some outdoor fungi can also be factors. Occupational exposure to, let us say, farmers who are working in fields, or people who are working in the cement or construction workers, occupational exposures can be a problem. Okay, host factors, genetic atopy, innate asthma, IgE is raised, airway hyperreactivity. Contributory factors or exacerbating factors, respiratory infections, small size at birth, and very obese people, diet related element factors, air pollution like automobile pollution, industrial pollution, or indoor pollutants, also kitchen pollution, smoking, active and passive smoking, all are contributory factors. Remember, smoking is not the causal factor, it is a contributory factor. Whereas in COPD, smoking is the important causal factor. Okay. Now, this is the mite I am telling. Dermocentor andersoni. It's a big name. What is that? That is the house mite. Uses bedding encasements, wash bed linens very regularly, avoid feather-filled pillows, lift the stuffed toys, limit the stuffed toys with the children that they play, and reduce the humidity levels in the house. So frequently change the bed linen, and put them in the hot sunlight. So automatically this is reduced. So commonest thing is dermocentor, which is the dust mite. Then this is cockroaches, oriental cockroach, brown banded cockroach, American cockroach. Wherever you are, cockroach you cannot avoid, because wherever there is food left and water, moisture and food, leftover food, moisture in the drains, open cupboards, and then open cupboards are common sources, and kitchens and toilets also. Always the cockroaches are found in the kitchens and toilets. Okay, so do not eat anywhere except in the dining rooms. That should be one of your basic things. Okay, so the most important thing is there must be a place to eat, and kitchen and toilet should be frequently cleaned, and no leftover food materials and moisture should be allowed. Cockroach feces is highly allergic and produces asthma. So two things we learned: the dust mite on the pillows and the bed linen, and the cockroaches. And of course, the pets that the people you play with, the kitten, and then the dogs, and some people sleep with the pets, they can also produce a lot of allergy. And this is another thing, molds. So you leave the unattended food there, the fungi, the molds form. And another thing is we try to mop the floors and never try to dry the mops. We try to keep the mops wet. On the wet mop, the fungus comes, it gives a peculiar smell also and produces the allergen. So you have to eliminate molds by not storing food without refrigerator, and also not allowing the so-called cleaning materials without drying. You have to dry them. So I've shown you what are the various common ways we can prevent the attacks of asthma. So what is the patient's history? He comes with recurrent attacks of episodic wheezing, troublesome cough, worse particularly at night, cough after physical activity. Exercise induced asthma or playing induced asthma is a known feature. And most important thing is seasonal breathing problems. Majority of us do not realize that we have asthma. We'll be coughing and coughing, take cough mixtures, this mixture, take x-ray, take some cough pills and some antibiotics unnecessarily. The underlying problem is hyperreactivity. If you treat the hyperreactivity with inhalers, the entire cough will go away. This is the experience for me over the 40 years. Okay, how do I diagnose? Not big CT scans, PET scans, nothing is required. All you require is an instrument called peak flow meter. This is the stethoscope for asthma. What is the peak flow meter? Peak flow meter is a basic tool in the GP's office. It costs somewhere around 300 to 400 Indian rupees, and equivalently you can see it must be available. I expect all of you by the end of this talk tomorrow, you buy a peak flow meter and use that. This is the easiest and earliest way to suspect asthma. Confirmation, of course, you require spirometry. Suspicion by peak flow meter, that is a screening, and then confirmation by the spirometry. When you do a spirometry, you ask the patient to sit before the computer. He just takes a deep breath and then puts the breath out, and the computer records this one. Diagnosis of asthma confirmed by demonstrating the presence of reversible airway obstruction using spirometry. So there are handheld spirometers also today. One of them I have with me here, the handheld spirometer. I'll show you at the end of it. And these are very handy. They're something like your small old type mobile phone only. And you can use it in the field also. And it gives all the required values that we compute in the lab spirometry. There are fixed spirometers like this, and this is also a handheld spirometer. Okay, how does the flow volume curve look like? It has got two components. One component is the expiratory component. Patient is asked to expire the air forcibly, and that is the expiratory component. Then he deeply inhales back, which is called the inspiratory component. This is the inspiratory flow rate. This is the expiratory flow rate. Plotted over time versus liter. This is in liters here, and time is on the y-axis. And the peak flow rate is this is the maximum expiratory flow, also called the PEF. This information can be obtained using this little instrument also, the peak flow meter. But all the other values are obtainable only using a spirometry. Okay. Now, simply I'm not going to go into details of spirometry, and this is how this is the normal curve. This is a curve of obstruction. This is a curve of severe obstruction. This is a curve of restriction, where there are two types of diseases, restrictive diseases and obstructive diseases. Looking at the curve itself, you'll be able to say whether it is obstructive, severely obstructive, or restrictive. Okay, what are the important measures? Forced vital capacity, forced expiratory volume in the first second. Supposing I take deep breath like that and try to blow out the air, I should be able to put out 80% of that volume of the air in the chest in the first second. That is called the first second volume. So first second volume by total vital capacity is the ratio that must be 80%. In asthmatics, what will happen? There is an obstruction to the airways outflow, and then they will take longer time. So the FEV1 is reduced. Consequently, FEV1 by FVC is also reduced. So what is the diagnostic yardstick? FEV1 should be lesser than expected. Expected will be, let us say, 4 liters. It is less than 80%. And FEV1 by FVC is further down. That ratio is around 80% or 75%. Okay. So normal FVC more than 80% is normal. More than 80% of the predicted FEV1 normal. And at least 75%, this ratio should be there. Okay, and we will take a separate class on pulmonary function testing alone, and I'm not going to go into the details of that now. Okay, now we have got that there are three types of asthmas that you see. One is called a very well controlled asthma. The other one is called partially controlled asthma and uncontrolled asthma. The green area is well controlled. Partially controlled, the yellow area. The red, yellow area, orange area is the poorly controlled. How do I know that? Daytime symptoms, none, more than two times in a week, and almost every day. Limitation activity, none. There is some limitation, there is gross limitation. There are no night symptoms, there may be night symptoms every time. And the need for rescue or reliever medicine, at least 2 times in a week they have to take, more than twice a week, every day they require. Lung function here is normal, it is less than 80% of the predicted, and this is poor lung function. So by symptomatology, by the FEV1, FVC ratio and the PEF and need for treatment, we can classify the patient as controlled, partially controlled, or uncontrolled. Okay, what is the most important thing? It is a dual problem. We have already looked at it. One is the bronchial hyperreactivity and inflammation. That is allergic inflammation. Allergic inflammation leads to edema, and there are inflammatory mediators are produced. That produces mucosal edema, and that results in bronchospasm, and bronchial hyperreactivity is triggered. The secondary feature is bronchospasm. Okay, the problem is real, treatment also is real. This allergic inflammation is the first part, bronchospasm is the second part. So obviously there are two pathologies going on, one related to the other, and you require two different types of medicines. So there are what are called the controller medicines to address this problem. There are reliever medicines to address bronchospasm. So when there is acute bronchospasm, I require to give relievers. When they are not not having attack, in between the attacks, I have to give controllers to see that they do not get the attack. So there is the pathology is twofold, treatment also is twofold. Relievers for the acute bronchospasm, controllers for the ongoing inflammation. Now, there are certain terminologies used in asthma. ICS means inhaled corticosteroids, inhaled bronchodilators, IBD, short-acting beta-2 agonists, long-acting beta-2 agonists, LABA, LAMA, long-acting muscarinic agents, MABA, muscarinic agent and beta agonists in one combined, leukotriene antagonists, LTA, oral corticosteroids, sustained release preparations. ICS, inhaled corticosteroids, is the sheet anchor of treatment of bronchial asthma. Inhaled bronchodilators, relievers when there are acute symptoms, particularly short acting in the acute case. When the symptoms are controlled, when it is chronic asthma, you use long acting beta agonists. And if it is not controlled, you can use antimuscarinic agents and also add a combination. Leukotriene antagonists, they suppress the mast cells and thereby reduce the inflammation of the airways. Oral corticosteroids are the last resort. We don't use them as a routine. Inhaled corticosteroids, ICS, ICS, ICS is the watchword for the treatment of asthma. In acute attack, combine along with that inhaled bronchodilators, particularly short-acting bronchodilators. Okay, spasm needs relief. Definitely. What are the bronchodilators? That is the bronchodilator drug beta 2 agonist, rescue medications. They must relieve the symptoms quickly, used in the acute attack. Action lasts for 4 to 6 hours, not for regular use. Once the asthma is controlled, there is no business to control bronchodilators unless there is an ongoing spasm. If there's in some people there will be an ongoing chronic spasm, then you can use a small dose twice a day or once a day long acting bronchodilator. Otherwise, bronchodilator drugs have no role for a regular use. Okay. Now, the preventer medications are they prevent allergic inflammation, they reduce inflammatory mediators, they reduce the hyperresponsiveness of the airways. They are for the long-term prevention of asthma. They prevent airway remodeling. They must be used ill or well. Means what? Inhaled corticosteroids are the long-term treatment of asthma, whether ill or well. Then only you can prevent future attacks and prevent airway remodeling. What is airway remodeling? I'll show you very shortly. So there are other newer approaches like PDE4 inhibitors, rofimilast, silomilast, omalizumab, monoclonal IgE antibodies, and several other things. It's okay, but routinely, asthma is not treated with these drugs. Asthma is treated acute attack by bronchodilators, inhaled bronchodilators, preferably short-acting beta agonist, SABA, and if the symptoms are controlled, long-acting bronchoagonist, not for constant use. Whereas inhaled corticosteroids, whether well or ill, these are called the preventers. So there are two things. Most often we forget to put the patient on inhaled corticosteroids for prevention. That is the biggest mistake. Okay, are we giving the right drug? Are we giving the right form? Are we using the correct technique? If the asthma is to be controlled, you have to question these things. Am I using the preventer and the reliever accordingly? Am I using the right drug formulation, not injectable, not tablet, but an inhaler route? Am I using the correct technique, demonstrating it to the patient? If you don't demonstrate, how does the patient know? Patients are not expected to know everything. We have to take time to demonstrate the correct use of the technique. Okay. Now, that is a normal bronchus, and that is what your mother has given you when you are born. And And you have to keep that like that forever till the age of mine. And how do I do that? First of all, avoid the allergens and treat the asthma as and when there is an inflammation of the airways. During asthma, see the very narrow passage. It is constricted. I treat and I partially treated, not completely treated. I did not give, let us say, the preventer. Patient vexes between these two levels, and then ultimately he will end up with what is called fixed obstruction or lead pipe obstruction or remodeled airway. This is what is called bronchostenosis. Just like your mitral stenosis, bronchostenosis. We as doctors have no business to make our patient an invalid by allowing him to go into bronchostenosis. Bronchospasm is okay. Bronchostenosis is irreversible. That is why a proportion of the asthmatics, at least 15% of the asthmatics, end up in COPD, non-reversible obstruction. That is because they are not properly treated or partially treated. That leads to fixed obstruction or lead pipe obstruction or remodeled airway or bronchostenosis. The emphasis to all primary physicians and postgraduates like you is to prevent bronchostenosis and remodeled airway by properly treating the asthma at the right time with the preventers ongoing and then relievers only at the time of acute attack. So let us now see. Adrenaline is gone, no more used. We as students, we used to use adrenaline. Don't use it. Get into arrhythmias. Deriphyllin is outdated and not used in many countries. I do not know whether you still have deriphyllin. In India, left and right practitioners use deriphyllin. Deriphyllin should not be used because of the safety window is very narrow, particularly the injectable. The common thing is if the patient comes with asthma, deri better, combine and give it. Not correct. And the olden days in our casualties, asthmatics used to come 10, 15 asthmatics in the night. Everybody used to get adrenaline, which is very unsafe today. We cannot give adrenaline now. Dangerous arrhythmias can come. Then oral short-acting bronchodilators, long-acting bronchodilators, restrict their use only as relievers, not as continuous treatment. SABA and LABA restrict their use. And theophylline in any form, either injectable or oral, beware. I have seen when my postgraduates have injected aminophylline very fast into the vein, we lost quite a few patients. It's unfortunate. So theophylline and particularly IV aminophylline is very dangerous. Okay, systemic steroids, not a routine choice. Systemic steroids produce all sorts of side effects. I have no business to use them as a routine choice. But ICS and IBDs are the treatment. Inhaled bronchodilators, inhaled corticosteroids are the treatment. Inhaled bronchodilators for relief, inhaled corticosteroids ongoing for prevention. Preventer and reliever. Remember this watchword. Now, look at the bronchomotor tone. The bronchi are supplied. This is the parasympathetic ganglion. This is the preganglionic nerve ending. This is the postganglionic nerve ending. And this produces, of course, whether sympathetic or parasympathetic, the postganglionic nerve ending is acetylcholine only. Acetylcholine acts on muscarinic receptors, M2 receptors, M1 receptors, and M3. In the muscle, we have M1 and M2 and M3. These are called the muscarinic receptors. So you have a car, let us say, a car will have a brake and an accelerator. For the car to go in the right speed, you require both the brake and the accelerator. If you push more acceleration, car will go and dash. If you don't have brake, you cannot control. If you use more brake, car will not move. So like that, the bronchomotor tone is governed by two things. The sympathetic, which dilates the bronchi, and the parasympathetic, which prevents the constriction. Parasympathetic is constriction, and then antiparasympathetic, if you use the parasympathetic drug, you block that, and the constriction is reduced. And dilation is produced by the sympathetic. They're like the brake and the accelerator. You can use with an advantage the sort of the muscarinic and receptor antagonists, like your, the drugs which I will show you in the muscarinic antagonists, short acting and long acting, and of course the LABA and SABA, which are the bronchodilators. The beta agonist is bronchodilator, parasympathetic inhibition is preventing the constriction. One dilates, the other prevents constriction, like a brake and accelerator. That's how the bronchomotor tone is synergistically controlled. So we will see that. And these are anticholinergic drugs, or the drugs which reduce the constrictor pathway. The main constrictor pathway is cholinergic drive, and you use anticholinergic drugs like oxytropium, epatropium, tiotropium. These are the, whenever you get the word tropium, epatropium, ipratropium, tiotropium, oxytropium, these are the anticholinergics which will reduce the bronchoconstriction. Whereas when we use the beta agonists, they produce dilation. They act synergistically. Epatropium, 80 micrograms. Tiotropium is once a day, and it acts both selectively on M1 and M3 receptors. And it is quite long acting. 40 micrograms is adequate. See the doses there in micrograms. When you give as inhalers, as much as micrograms are required. When you want to give the same theophylline or same salbutamol as the oral tablet, you have to give 2 milligrams, 4 milligrams, 8 milligrams. Here it is micrograms, 100 micrograms, 200 micrograms, 400 micrograms, like that. The dose is very small. So inhaled treatment is the watchword. So how do I treat now? The treatment is now basically beta 2 receptor agonists, and then anti-muscarinic agents and inhaled corticosteroids. Beta 2, this is beta 2 here. Beta 2 agonists are the short-acting bronchodilators, long-acting bronchodilators. Short-acting, salbutamol, levosalbutamol, terbutaline, and phenytoin. Long-acting bronchodilators for a long-term asthma, formoterol, arformoterol, salmeterol, indaceterol, pambuterol. These are all long-acting bronchodilators called the LABAs. Acute attack, SABA. Maintenance of relief, LABA. And not controlled, add short-acting muscarinic receptor antagonists, which are anticholinergics. Okay, this is sympathetic plus, we are increasing the sympathetic tone, we are cutting the parasympathetic tone. That is by the SAMA. SAMA is epatropium bromide and oxytropium bromide. Long-acting muscarinic antagonist, tiotropium bromide, 40 micrograms once a day. These are 80 to 100 micrograms twice a day you have to use. And then you have inhaled corticosteroids. These are the mainstay. These are the preventers which have to be given whether ill or well. I have short acting, I have long acting. When the patient is acutely symptomatic, I use short acting beclomethasone, budesonide, long acting fluticasone. And a combination of these things, a combination of a steroid with a sort of salbutamol, a steroid with a formoterol, various combinations are available. But always I prefer to give them independently. Give the beta 2 as one inhaler, corticosteroid as another inhaler, because sometimes these may be given twice or thrice a day. These may be given only once a day. It is easier to manipulate rather than a combined treatment. But there is a convenience in giving the combination also. Okay, bronchodilators, salbutamol, salmeterol, action is very fast here. It takes little more time, duration, long duration. And then the selective beta selectivity is lower, whereas here the beta 2 versus beta 1, very highly selective salmeterol. If it is selective, there are no cardiac effects, only the bronchial effect. Anticholinergic drugs, tiotropium, epatropium short-acting, epatropium long-acting, 4 to 8 hours, 24 hours. And all three, M1, M2, M3 are inhibited. Here M1 and M3 are more inhibited than the M2. That is the advantage of tiotropium. Okay. Now, so what did we learn? The treatment of asthma is twofold. One is the preventer, ill or well, reliever when the patient is having bronchoconstriction. If I don't use them properly, I produce a pulmonary invalid. How? By making the bronchostenosis or rigid bronchi will happen. And I have a short-acting preparations, long-acting preparations, the beta agonists, the antimuscarinics, and the steroids. I use the antimuscarinic and beta agonists to relieve the symptoms, and I use the corticosteroids as a prevention. No IV or oral corticosteroids, no theophylline. Only the drugs which have said SABA or LABA, SAMA, with or without SAMA or LAMA, and ICS, short acting or long acting. SICS or LICS you can use. So inhaled corticosteroids has changed the life of asthmatics. ICS, ICS, ICS. This is the watchword. Inhaled corticosteroids are the most potent, effective anti-inflammatory medications available for asthma world over. The treatment, there is a paradigm shift in the treatment of asthma. Once we knew that it is airway inflammation is the primary thing, and these have to be given whether the patient is ill or well. Then corticosteroids, should I give? The question mark. Patient will say, no, 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 this is steroid, as though it is fire or some dangerous poisonous snake. No, they are inhaled medicines. This is also a very big question. Ask the patient to use inhaler. No, no, no. My grandmother says we should not use inhalers. My grandfather, my aunt said inhalers are very dangerous and habit forming. All these sort of stories we hear. But if the good habit forms, let the habit form. If I'm regularly walking, it is a habit forming. Okay, that's a good habit. Let it form. What is wrong in that? So you have to convince on two counts. One, steroids are the treatment and inhaled medicines are the mode of delivery. These have to be convinced. Patients' wrong beliefs, parents and grandparents, there will be many neighbors, many non-doctors who are wonderful doctors in the community. They themselves will claim that they know everything and they'll be advising your parents of patients saying, no, 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 corticosteroids are very dangerous. Steroid you should not use. No, no, inhalers you'll get used to it. All this is very false myth. You have to bring the patient out of the myth, then only the patient will be safe. First of all, let us believe in science and let us explain and convince them once whatever we believe. Let us change their lives for happy lives. How? By giving corticosteroids, particularly the inhaled corticosteroids. Add-on will be bronchodilator medication, short or long, with or without antimuscarinics. Okay. What is available for me? The oral steroids and the inhaled route. Okay. If I use oral medication for asthma, it is a very slow in onset, whereas inhaled medications are rapid in onset. These are large doses. I have to use 4 milligrams of salbutamol. Here I can use 100 micrograms of salbutamol. See the dose difference? Greater side effects. Drug is delivered to the site where there is a problem. Erratic absorption because of food and other things. Better tolerated. Not useful in acute illness because it takes time for the drug to go and act. A treatment of choice in acute symptoms. This is the advantage of inhaled medicines. You have to, this slide is to convince yourself first and convince your patients that they have to go on to inhaled treatment. There is no second thought. Asthma treatment without inhaled treatment is ridiculous and it is not science. Okay. Now, inhaled corticosteroids, I have budesonide, beclomethasone, fluticasone. Any one of them can be used. So I start with 400 to 1000 micrograms per day, approximately two divided doses, and maintain them for 3 months and slowly keep it at 200 micrograms. First of all, I go up very high dose of inhaled steroid around 400, 600 per day in two divided doses. Let's say I'm giving 1000, give 500 in the morning, 500 in the night, but bring it down. After 3 months, you may not require that much and keep just 200 micrograms per day. They are very safe for years of long-term use. Then the next question is, How safe are the inhaled steroids? They're very safe. Even in small children, several years they can use. 30% of Olympic athletes are on an inhaled steroids. Nobody would have allowed if there are dangerous substances in athletes. 30% of athletes, they use inhaled steroids, not anabolic. They don't enhance their performance like your anabolic steroids. So they're permitted in the Olympics also because they are not anabolic steroids. And even highest dose of inhaled steroid is safer than the lowest oral dose of steroid. Highest dose of inhaled steroid is safer than the lowest dose of the oral steroids. Okay. Best addiction in asthmatics. They say, oh, I get addicted to my inhaler. Why not? You get addicted. I'm very happy if you are addicted to the inhaler because it is a good addiction. It's a good addiction to have. Yeah, they should be using the inhaler regularly, and that's a very good addiction. So inhaled corticosteroids are safe even in children. 400 micrograms per day, 9 years of continuous use, no growth retardation. Uncontrolled asthma causes growth retardation. Published in New England Journal of Medicine. If you don't treat asthma properly, growth retardation will occur. If you use steroids, no growth retardation. So there are, not all are the same. Beclomethasone, short-acting budesonide, 12th hourly, salmeterol, 12th hourly, fluticasone, 24, formoterol, 24 hours. Depending on that, you have to tailor the treatment. Choice is based on whether it is urgent or not, whether it is uncontrolled or not. If it is uncontrolled or urgent, you use 6th hourly. Okay? Yeah, and then need a maintenance, then you use 12th hourly. Stabilized patient, for convenience, use 24 hours. So the choice is whether you use 6th hourly or 12th hourly or 24 hourly. Acute patient, urgent condition, uncontrolled, 6th hourly medication like beclomethasone and salbutamol. And for maintenance or well controlled, twice a day, morning and evening. And for very long term convenience and stabilized patients, once a day treatment also can be used. All asthma medications inhaled are safe in pregnancy. This is another question. Many of the patients, they stop the inhalers when they're becoming pregnant. Then I asked them, why did you stop? My gynecologist said I should not use. Sometimes some gynecologists may not be aware. They may stop. Or my grandmother said, you have a baby in the abdomen, so you should not use inhalers. If you use inhalers, baby will be affected. Wrong. So you have to convince the pregnant woman, all the more she must use the inhaler steroids properly because the baby needs good oxygenation. Otherwise, fetal distress will occur, fetal anoxia will occur. So we have to convince all pregnant patients. Many a time it made me a phone call to make a phone call to my gynecology colleagues to sort of prevail on their patient, obstetric patients to continue the inhalers even when they're pregnant. In spite of the fact that they're pregnant, they should use it because in pregnancy, all the more important. Then we have what are called leukotriene antagonists, left and right prescribed, Monter, Montelukast, this, that, and all, without even seeing whether the need. These are the first line in children, not in adults. How long you give? 3 to 4 months. There's no point in giving for years. I've seen prescriptions of leukotriene antagonists being continued for 5 years, 4 years. They have no role. They have role only for the first 2 or 3 months. Particularly in children, chewable tablets of Montelukast, leukotriene antagonist is very helpful. Jupirlukast is not available, but in some countries it is available. These are available for children as 4 and 5. For adults, they're available as 8 milligram tablets. These can be add on to the ICS, add on to the inhaled bronchodilators. So we have an additional drug today in leukotriene inhibitors or leukotriene modifiers in the form of Montelukast. Okay, ICS not effective. Yeah. Doctor, you have given ICS, but the inhaled corticosteroid, patient is not responding. What could be the reason? Check the inhaler, check the technique, check the regularity of use. Did the inhaler being properly used? I had a patient who was using the inhaler will be somewhat like this with a mouthpiece like this. Okay. Instead, what the patient was doing, the patient is keeping the inhaler upside down and pressing. What will happen? It will not work. It will go out. It will leak out. So the proper technique of keeping the inhaler in mouth, closing the lips, taking a breath while inhalation is being taken are important. Check the use, check the technique. That is the reason that it did not work. In the first place, ICS did not relieve or prevent the disease because inhaler is not properly used and not regularly used. Okay, patient is not responding. Then I add a long-acting bronchodilator, beta agonist like formoterol or salmeterol, and if still not controlled, increase the dose, double the dose of the inhaled steroid, taking 400, make it 800, and then you can bring it down later on. And that is the third step. And the fourth one, you add Montelukast acid as the fourth level of treatment. Then you add on sustained theophylline, which is rarely required after this. So this is called the step care treatment of asthma. I'm going to show you one more table that probably we may be concluding this session. So SABA, that is inhaled bronchodilator in full doses for the acute attack, short-acting beta agonist or SABA, inhaled bronchodilator in full doses for relief is the first thing in an acute attack. How much I give? You can give 100 or 200 micrograms or 400 micrograms of salbutamol as you can. SABA is not going to help, then increase the frequency of the SABA or nebulize the drug using a nebulizer. This is all for the acute attack, not for prevention. Then SABA as above, then add epatropium bromide, epatropium IBD, inhaled bronchodilator, epatropium, which is antimuscarinic. Then also not relieved, you add oral corticosteroid, methylprednisolone, up to 30 to 60 milligrams for 3 to 10 days. I'm treating the acute attack now. Remember, this is the treatment of acute attack. SABA, full dose. Then increase the frequency or nebulize the drug. Add IBD, not relieved, add an oral steroid, no inhaled steroid here, oral steroid because it's acute attack, 3 to 10 days and come out of that. Then you can add an inhaled steroid at that stage and maintain it for 6 weeks at a dose of 1000 micrograms. Then bring it down gradually 200 micrograms and stop oral steroid and then stop the other drugs. If symptoms are not relieved with this treatment, check the technique. Symptoms are not relieved, check the technique, check the technique, check the technique, and check the compliance. Otherwise, there is no reason that it does not work. Either the compliance patient is not using or the technique is wrong. Look for aggravating factors. Suppose somebody has got GE reflex, they have acid burn, acid is reflecting. This is called GERD associated asthma. I have many patients of asthma. The moment I treat the GERD, the asthma is gone. And emotions, stress, sinusitis. They have upper airway infection, treat the allergic sinusitis or infective sinusitis, the asthma is gone. Allergic rhinitis, treat with inhaled nasal sprays, asthma is gone. GE reflex, sinusitis, allergic rhinitis, emotions and stress are the aggravating factors which may prevent the relief occurring. So check this, SABA, full dose, increase the frequency, nebulize, add epatropium, then add oral methylprednisolone for 10 days, then if necessary add ICS for 6 weeks, bring it down to 200 micrograms. Symptoms are not relieved with the above list of treatment, technique is wrong or patient is not using. These are the two common conditions. Of course, remember GE reflex, sinusitis, allergic rhinitis, emotion, and stress. Okay, role of theophylline, no role. Oral SABAs, not very useful. Oral LABAs, that is, salbutamol oral, terbutaline oral, formoterol oral, bromelast oral, not used. Okay, now step care approach, chronic disease, that is the maintenance. This is for the prevention. Here, ICS is the treatment of choice. ICS plus LABA, if not controlled, ICS LABA plus double dose ICS. Then you have got ICS double dose plus LABA plus a leukotriene. And then you have got ICS double dose, LABA, leukotriene. Then I'll add a little bit of oral steroid at that point. And then you can add tiotropium now because it's not controlled with ICS double dose, LABA, LTA, leukotriene, and oral corticosteroid. Then you are at liberty to add tiotropium or epatropium bromide. SR theophylline may be an add-on, but not as a routine. SABA or LABA oral and IPA, IVD may be a useful add-on at a later stage. No long-acting steroid injections, please. I know some practitioners who give some Canacort or some depot injections into the buttock, long-acting steroids to prevent asthma. Don't do that. What will happen? They will eat away the bones and they come with GIO, sorry, GOI or GI, glucocorticoid induced osteoporosis. They'll come out with that. You'll be risking a lot. Never use long-acting steroid injections. No injectable or short-acting theophylline. If at all I want to use theophylline, it is only an SR tablet, acebrophylline, and then there are other formulations of long-acting theophylline, which we can sometimes use as add-ons. So again, I'm telling for the, for the acute attack, the treatment is SABA in full dose, SABA plus nebulized, SABA plus epatropium, not controlled, oral steroid, not controlled, 1000 micrograms of inhaled steroid, then gradually bring down. Look for the aggravating factors and no role for theophylline. So inhaled steroids, then inhaled steroids plus LABA, and then you have got inhaled steroids plus LABA plus double the dose of inhaled steroids, not at controlled, then you are at liberty to add leukotriene antagonist, which is your montelukast. Not straight away everybody should get montelukast, which is not correct. Majority of us, we start treating straight away with montelukast. This is not correct. ICS plus LABA plus leukotriene plus oral steroid. Then not controlled, you are at liberty to add tiotropium, and then SR theophylline may come in picture, short-acting and long-acting oral preparations of salbutamol, formoterol can be tried as add-on. No long-acting steroid injection, no theophylline in injectable form, either IM or IV aminophylline. Okay, now the lecture is going to be over. So yours faithfully, that is me, yours faithfully urges you what? After this presentation, a little time spent talking to our patients is really a great investment. Demonstrate the use of inhaler and how they should hold, when they should. For example, there are several things are there. The meter dose is there, the rotacaps are there, and then the disc inhalers are there, and also the nebulizers are there. Depending on the patient's age and preference, you use either a rotacap or use a meter dose inhaler MDI or use a disc inhaler or use a nebulizer. Nebulizer is very easy even for children, and you can use spacers, small volume spacers and large volume spacers. The idea is the medicine should go into the lung and stay there for a while. I'm going to show you the inhalation technique. So if this is the inhaler I'm having, it should be held upright like that, and this should be kept in the mouth, okay? And the mouthpiece should be tightly gripped by the lips, and patient should be ready to trigger it on the top. And he just, before putting in the mouth, he takes normal 2-3 respirations and puts in the mouth and takes a deep breath. While taking the deep breath, he will accelerate or he will trigger the device. He'll press it, the jet comes. When the jet comes, he must take a deep breath. Then what will happen? It will go and fill the lower respiratory passages. Then immediately he should not exhale. He must close the mouth like that. How long? Minimum 6 counts. And then This is the right tech. And after using this medication, they must rinse their mouths with water or gargle with saline. Okay, this is why, because this inhaled steroid or the bronchodilator, it will go and deposit on the oropharynx, and that will be irritating to the patient. And if it is steroid powder there lurking on the pharynx, it can brood fungal infection, particularly candidiasis. If you don't advise them to rinse the mouth thoroughly for 5 minutes after taking the inhalation, you are in for a risk of oral candidiasis. So that is important. A little time spent in talking to your patients, means students here, is a great investment. That's why I spent 5 minutes of my time in demonstrating the technique of inhalation. This may make all the difference. I tell you, this may make all the difference between a very happy life as an almost like a normal individual or a pulmonary invalid who will not be able to take breathing with bronchostenosis and remodeled bronchi. Choice is yours, whether you want your patients to become permanently bad or you want to be an excellent doctor by giving them all the good advice, making them happy. In the process, you also be very happy and feel fulfilled. Feel very fulfilled as a great physician. This is the message I have got for you. My dear friends, don't neglect asthma. Asthma is no laughing matter. And it is a highly treatable disease. If you properly use the preventers, no need for acute attacks. The acute attack comes, use the reliever, bring down the acute attack, go for the preventer. Proper inhalation technique, proper 3 questions. Am I using the right drug? Am I using the right dose? Am I using the right technique of this one, which I have shown you earlier? That makes all the difference. And ultimately, what you give them is a lifetime happiness. You see, these are all asthmatic children, okay, who are very happy. Some of them are our patients also. When we conduct these camps, the asthmatic children, we take pictures, and it's very nice to see these children playing like other normal children. A lifetime happiness is given by just being very careful in understanding what I said. And please follow this advice. If you have any questions, there are anything in the chat box, I will look into that. Now it is 9:30 Indian time, and it is time for me to close my presentation. I stop here and wait for your feedback and questions.
Thank you so much, sir, for your nice presentation. We learned a lot from your presentation, and you spoke about a lot of things about asthma, and I hope this will be really helpful for the young doctors. Sir, I have some question for you on behalf of some junior
Please go
doctors.
ahead. Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Yes. Sir, first thing I would like to tell that sometimes we get patients like acute bronchial asthma attacks in our chambers. So in that case, what will be the primary treatment we'll go for the acute bronchial asthma attack patients? And should we refer them to some respiratory medicine specialist or hospital, or should we give the primary management?
Yeah, I would advise you to go by the oximetry. If the oximetry is, let us say, 92 and above, there is no desaturation. You can maintain and treat the patient at your level. Suppose there is desaturation, patient will require some amount of oxygen support. And if you have that, you can as well do it. The immediate thing that you have to start on the reliever medication. What are reliever medication? Inhaled bronchodilators. Don't use long acting, use short acting inhaled bronchodilator like salbutamol inhaler or levosalbutamol inhaler. Not by this method, but in acute attack, give a sort of a nebulizer with a mask 3 to 4 times a day. Salbutamol has to be given, and along with that, if the symptoms are not controlled, you can add little bit of apotropium or tiotropium and a little steroid if necessary. As I've shown you the step care approach. For an acute attack, the treatment is inhaled salbutamol combined with nebulizer, then add this one, the inhaled tiotropium, or sorry, ipratropium, and if necessary, oral or inhaled steroid, and not injectables, anything. Managing in your clinic requires to assess whether the patient's oxygenation is good enough. If it is more than 92 SpO2, you are justified in keeping them with you and then give them. And don't try to use intramuscular, intravenous injections, not required. Asthma is a disease of the airways. The best route of treatment is inhalation. Preferably in an acute setting, you use a nebulizer.
Thank you so much, sir, for your answer. Sir, I have another question. Sir, nowadays it's the pandemic time and lots of people are affected with COVID-19. And as you know, the asthma patients, they're more prone to get infected by COVID-19. So can you please suggest for the patients that how they can prevent themselves from being affected by COVID-19 or how they will take care of them once they get affected by COVID-19? Like these patients are very sensitive and they're not like common people. So
Correct.
can you please enlighten us with the measures they should be
Yeah, and with the
taking?
COVID pandemic in place, COVID is an acute viral respiratory infection of upper and lower airways, with the result, and it can trigger the asthmatic attacks. If they're already asthmatics, the asthma is exacerbated. If they're in remission, there could be an acute attack. So never the patient should stop the inhaler when the COVID has started. So they should continue their inhalers, ICS, and also continue to use whatever treatment for asthma they are using. Supposing they are not using, the best thing is again, just like the other patient, you treat the acute attack. But only thing is because this is a highly infectious condition, patient should follow all the COVID appropriate behavior like isolation, separate room, separate nebulizer and all that. And of course, hand washing and preventing the transmission of infection. And inhaled corticosteroids are no contraindication for treatment of acute asthma in a COVID patient. If necessary, you can use inhaled steroid, inhaled short-acting bronchodilators as nebulizer, inhaled steroids, and a little bit of antibiotic also might help if the patient is an asthmatic because they're more prone for infection. You can give a milder cover like azithromycin or something if the patient is an asthmatic. Unlike a patient of COVID who is not an asthmatic, I'm not going to put them on an antibiotic. Whereas in an asthmatic child or an adult, I would give them inhaled steroid, inhaled salbutamol as a nebulizer with all the COVID precautions. And of course, you can also give leukotriene, and it is going to help them because the mast cells will be stabilized, which will be helpful in the other inflammation also. And a little small 500 milligrams per adults of azithromycin for 5 days, which I normally don't give in the other non-COVID patient. This is how we go about. And of course, keep monitoring the oximetry. The chances of them coming down with hypoxia is much higher than a normal asthmatic patient. So you have to be very careful. They may go in for desaturation, at which stage they may require supplemental oxygen, either non-invasive or unfortunately if the drops further down, invasive oxygen. Okay.
Thank you so much, sir. Sir, those are the young doctors, those are doing GP. So they face a lot of scenarios like this. A patient, suppose I am prescribing Montelukast to a patient now.
Mm.
And we often see that these patients come back to us after 6 months or 1 year, and they're still taking Montelukast at the same dose. And they say, oh, you prescribed me this, and that's why I'm continuing this. I hope, sir, you have also observed this a lot among patients.
Yeah,
So, sir,
unfortunately,
yes, sir. So,
go
sir,
ahead.
my question is, sir, how we should advise the patients to come to follow up to the doctors, and how we should counsel them to take medication so they don't do practices like this, continuing medications for 1 year and 2 year at the same dose.
So in this, I have an experience. One of my patients who is a bank employee, I have prescribed him prednisolone 40 milligrams for his acute joint pain of rheumatoid arthritis. So that's for 1 week I gave. He held that prescription and took for 15 years the same medicine. When it was not working, he doubled the dose and started taking 80 milligrams of prednisolone for 15 years. And ultimately, I saw him when he lost his kidneys and he died before my eyes. So Patient behavior is very erratic. If you give a prescription, they will take it for years without your knowledge. As I told you, Montelukast is not the first drug in adult asthma. In childhood asthma, yes, it can be given as the first line. In the adult asthma, reliever, SABA, and then maintenance, LABA, and then inhaled steroid for prevention. Montelukast is an add-on drug and not the first line of drug. How much I give? 4 or 5 for children, 8 or 10 for the adult. You give for how long? 3 months at the most. After that, it doesn't work. By then, the mast cells have stabilized and it is not going to have, unless they keep on getting repeated acute attacks, long-term Montelukast will not really work. You have to advise on the patients. And how do I do that? I ask the patient in asthma to see me at least once in a month for the first 6 months until they're stabilized. Once they're stabilized, they can come and see us at 6 months intervals or something like that. And most importantly, underline the prescription and say this is only for this much period and write anybody supplying the medicine beyond the period, taking that at their own risk they are taking. You have to write that. Otherwise, tomorrow they say that you have prescribed, I have taken, come after 5 years, bone is gone, glucocorticoid induced osteoporosis, acute renal shutdown, or anything can happen. Okay? And with steroids, with Montelukast long-term use, there are no bad effects, but it is a wasted drug, isn't it?
And I would like to thank you, sir, from both the MediSchool team and the Incepta team for being with us here. And we would also like to invite you to come visit Bangladesh here when you get time. It was really great to hear from you, sir, and we are really honored to have you tonight, sir. Thank you so much, sir, again for your valuable time. And in between, I would like to tell about our mentor. Our mentor is an excellent doctor, and if I start telling his designation, it won't end tonight. He has so many degrees and so many qualifications, but still I would like to say some for on behalf of his team and on behalf of our team. So Dr. Sharma VSN Rajakundu, sir, he is an MD in Internal Medicine, MSc Canada, FCGP, FICP, FIAMS, and FIMCA, and FCCP USA, FSCP USA, FRCP, and he is an emeritus professor of cardiology from Rajiv Gandhi Institute of Medical Sciences, Andhra Pradesh. He is a consultant physician from Manipal Hospitals, Bangalore. He is an adjacent faculty, JSS Ahir Medical College, Mysore. He is an adjacent professor from Tamil Nadu and Dr. MGR Medical University, Chennai, and he's an online faculty for MRCP training and Textile America University, and he's an honorary national professor of medicine, IMSCGP. Our mentor tonight is also former secretary, American College of Physicians, Indian chapter. Sir, we don't know how we would like to thank you. I mean, so many designations, so many achievements. We don't know we can even reach near to you someday, but it was really, really honorable for us to have you here. And we learned a lot from you, sir. And we hope in future we'll continue these classes from you and we'll keep learning from you, sir.
You are a wonderful child. And I started like you. At that time, I didn't even have MBBS next to my letters. All those things have come over time. That means what? If we strive, we can achieve even the Mount Everest. But if you don't strive, we will be where we were. This
So
is
right
what I have learned.
now, sir, these degrees will be enough for me, sir. Mount Everest would be
Now,
way more out of my league, sir.
okay. All those qualifications or degrees or accolades which you have mentioned, they tell only one thing. They tell you that you be a responsible person. You live up to your expectation. So if I am not responsible, if I am not doing the right things with all those qualifications or whatever it is, they're a waste, isn't it? So we have to learn and be humble. Any success should go to the heart and not to the head.
Thank you so
Enjoy the
much.
success and
Yes,
don't
sir.
become egoistic with the success. That is the message I have, and I'm sure all of you can get even more degrees than what I have, provided you have the will and the perseverance to pursue it.
Yes, sir. We are almost done with every question. Sir, one of our doctors said all of my confusion has gone. After this session, I get more confidence to treat asthma patients properly.
If that is achieved and the purpose is fulfilled, the evening is well utilized.
Dr.
Uh,
Sharma, I'm Dr. Gauri Shankar from Chennai. I have just in a chronic asthma, in spite of the GARD, how to find out and how to go about. And when you chronic asthma with associated bronchiectasis, all those things, any need for surgical implementation, it's apart
Uh,
from,
Yeah, if somebody has got a resectable bronchiectasis, segmental or lobar or lobular or regional bronchiectasis, which is troubling them and exacerbating their asthma, there is a role for surgery. Otherwise, bronchial asthma is basically a medical condition. There is nothing much you need to do on the surgical front, except that when the patient have got bronchiectasis or an infection with lung abscess, or they have a pleural effusion with empyema. Some people will land in some complications. Then surgery comes in picture. And the other thing is, the GERD is such a common disorder. We overlook GERD and start only treating the asthma. And if you are putting them on oral steroids by not properly knowing what to give, the GERD will be aggravated. So first of all, any GERD patient, do not use oral medications, either steroid or bronchodilators, because they are going to again increase the GERD. Second thing is GERD is a condition which keeps perpetually coming. So what do? You give them the prokinetics along with the PPEs, and then you keep continuing the treatment on the as on need basis. This is called on demand PPI, and the prokinetics as long as required. The other thing is the position of sleeping also. Patient should not sleep like this and should not sleep after food. At least 2 hours, the stomach should be, until it is empty, patient should be erect, then sleep like this. These are some basic measures of controlling GERD. And of course, you need to you evaluate why the GERD is there. Is this hiatus? If there is a hiatus, you have a role, you surgeon. You can do some treatment for the hiatus hernia, sliding hiatus, or whatever is the type of hiatus. Do an endoscope and find out what is the type of GERD he is having. And this GERD could lead to Barrett's. Barrett's esophagus again requires at later stages in surgical treatment. There is a role for surgical treatment for chronic GERD and hiatus and asthma with bronchiectasis if it is regional or very localized.
thank you so much, sir. As usual, excellent lecture and predisposition and helping everyone out. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, sir. Sir, we have a last comment for you. This is from Shamima Tasnim. She said, thank you so much, sir, for taking the time out of your busy schedule in spreading knowledge among us. Your quote has really inspired me. Success should go to your heart and not to your head. It really humbled me, and it was a good reminder also.
You are medical students as long as you are in the medical college, and you are students of medicine once you leave the frontiers of the college. So it means what? You are an eternal student. You are a permanent student of medicine. That is why we say, I practice medicine. I never say I perfected medicine. Nobody can say I perfected medicine. What are you doing? I am a medical practitioner. I am practicing medicine, lifelong practice. Each patient is an open book. Learn from each patient. The best way to learn medicine is not in the books, there in the library, but in the patient. If you properly examine and correlate with your theoretical knowledge, you are the wonderful doctor, I tell you.
Thank you so much, sir. I'm again thanking you on behalf of MediSchool team and Incepta team from being with us here. And it was a really, really amazing session with you tonight. And please take care of yourself and be in good health. Keep doing the good works you're doing for humanity, for medicine, for that patients you are seeing. and we wish you all the very best, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah,
We are,
I guess the kind words and the way in which you people are talking is a culture by itself of Bangladesh, I guess. That's what I have seen when I came there, and we should imbibe that, all of us. I'm very thankful to you. Thank you very much.